blank page. For me, this is my least favorite part of the writing process is starting when it's blank, when there's at the very beginning and you don't have any words on paper. It can feel very overwhelming. And it is, I think, quite a challenge for people, at our level during graduate school, but throughout people's careers. So we wanted to start by asking you what your favorite or your least favorite part of the writing process is. Um, because it can be different for everybody, but hopefully, if this is something that you really dislike. Today, we're going to go through a couple of different strategies on how we can address this blank page and then how we can also establish some writing habits, which is really important in graduate school. So throughout this time, um, feel free to just unmute and ask questions if you have any, or you can put them in the chat and I can look at it there. I totally forgot. My name is Gabby. So throughout this presentation, if you have anything, you can just say, "Hey, Gabby, hold up, stop. I have a question," and I can pause and we can talk and discuss about whatever you might need. And so, like I said, we're going to start by talking about some strategies for starting your writing projects. And then we'll go into establishing different writing habits. And then I can talk a little bit about some resources that are available to you all. Okay, so let's dive in. So there are tons of different strategies people use to start their writing projects. And today I've listed quite a few, but you can use any one of these. You can try all of these. I definitely do a mixture of a couple of these strategies for different writing projects. Um, and if you're still stuck on like, I'm not really sure what works best for me or how to employ one of these kinds of strategies, then you also can feel free to come to the Graduate Writing Center and we can help you brainstorm and see which strategy might work best for you as well. Okay, so the first kind of way to start that I like to think about is called mind mapping. So basically, this is where you're trying to find connections between all your different ideas. So usually you can do this writing down on a piece of paper and just starting with your topic in the middle and then hitting main points that you need to that you want to describe. And then for each of those points, you give some supporting information, some evidence, or also some discussion points. So, for example, if you're writing let's say, traditional scientific paper, most of my expertise is in the science realm, so I apologize if others have other fields that they are most familiar with. But for me, I could start with my central issue, which is talking about microscopic plants in the ocean. And then I would talk about the three major points. I would write the three major points that I want to hit on in my paper. One being, phytoplankton's role in the ecosystem, which are those microscopic plants, um, how they're affected by environmental conditions, and then maybe um, what's going on within their bodies during these environmental condition changes. And then I would maybe, for me, when I'm doing the mind mapping, instead of writing pieces of like evidence, I like to write papers down that support these points, but you can choose, whatever works best for you. So this way is really cool to find connections between major points and supporting information. But it can get a little messy, but if you're fine with that, that's great. Um, this is an example from somebody else's mind map, but you can see that they're talking about proteins in our bodies. And then the main points here, they're talking about, the function, disorders or deficiencies, how do we get them in our diet, and then structure of proteins. And then you can see there's all these different kinds of supporting information or ideas, even little pictures to help them kind of organize their thoughts. So this is a really good like starting point where maybe you're at really like zero. You don't know what you're going to be writing about, but you have a general idea or general topic. This is kind of good to really just get all of your ideas out of your brain onto a piece of paper, and then you can start to draw connections. One of my personal favorite strategies is the next thing I'm going to talk about. It's called the message box. So I usually employ this strategy before I start writing, but at a point where I have a general idea of what I'm going to be writing about. So, what this strategy or this kind of tool does is it makes you think about who you're writing for. So, you write down the audience. That could be a target journal if you're publishing in a journal. It could be, your committee if this is your thesis or your dissertation. It could be the general public if you're writing like a piece that is for the general public, obviously. So thinking about your audience is really good because that'll also help guide the tone and how you're writing your paper. So this is one strategy that I really like because it makes me really consider who I'm writing for. And then we have this setup of our paper here in 5 different little compartments. So here in the center is our main issue, our main topic. So that can be a more general statement. So again, going back to my phytoplankton example, I'm going to talk about, let's say the big issue is that our oceans are warming and that might affect phytoplankton physiology. And so then in this problem section, this is where I ask my specific questions. This is more geared towards for me, when I'm thinking about the scientific method, these are like my guiding research questions here. So in this section, it's really helpful to start listing them. And then that is actually going to end up being, what guides the whole research paper for me. So really laying out my specific questions here is really nice. And then the solutions box here, that's what kinds of methods I can employ to answer those questions. How am I going to answer those questions? So, is it, going to the ocean and scooping up water and looking at phytoplankton under a microscope, or is it using a computer model to try to predict what they're doing in different environments, things like that. So, the problems and the solutions are usually pretty straightforward because those are things that, you have a lot of experience in and you've probably done a lot of work with your solutions or your methods. Then these last 2 boxes, there's the benefit and then the so what. So these can kind of be convoluting sometimes, but how I like to think of it is the benefit is thinking about the contribution to your field. So how, if you do all this work, how is this going to move your field forward? What does this mean? What kind of like knowledge gap does it fill? And then the so what is more of the broader impact to society. So if you do this research and it benefits your field, it moves the field forward, why would a person far removed from, for me, let's say oceanography. Why would they care? How does this impact their daily life? What do the findings mean to the broader society? So I like to do this at the beginning of a project, but I also like to keep it with me as I'm writing and throughout the whole writing process because I really like to see if the final product, aligns with the ultimate message I laid out in this in this tool. And so I have a link in this presentation that has a PDF where you can fill in the message box. So I'll make sure to send that along with all these materials to you all afterwards because it's really helpful. But as an example, I usually just draw it right on paper. So, it's not really important what's on here, but this is how it usually looks. So it's a lot of just like my notes and general ideas to kind of get me started. Okay, so the next strategy is one that one of our other writing tutors just told me that they use quite often. Um, Sometimes people are a lot more comfortable making a presentation about their work than writing a paper. So the advice that they gave me was that you put your work and your outline into a PowerPoint um, because they're really good at like telling a story with a presentation. So they suggested making a PowerPoint of your paper, and then that could help be your outline and guide you throughout your writing process. I think it's a really cool idea. And then they also were highlighting the fact that, if you realize that if you have a detailed outline on your slides here, not just intro, methods, results, discussion, whatever, you have detailed paragraphs of what you're going to talk about step by step. Then you can also see if things flow, and if they don't, you can easily move it around in PowerPoint until it does flow. So it's a really nice organizational tool. It is going to guide you through your writing process, but also ultimately, um, most of us will present this at some point or another, our work. So then you already have a head start on a presentation as well. So it's kind of a win-win. I really like that idea, and that was a new one that I heard about. So wanted to share it with you all. Another idea is this kind of idea of asking yourself questions and answering them. So basically, some people have a lot easier time doing like a class assignment, for example, because it's very directed and you're just trying to answer a question, right? So you know what you need to write because you need to answer what your professor asked you. So I've done this a couple of times and it really does help spark my creativity. Um, so I don't do it all the time, but if I'm really stuck and I just have like no motivation to like push my um writing out, or like my creativity just feels like it's not there for the day, I'll write myself a list of questions like this and then I'll just start answering them. And that just gets me to have at least something down on the paper, and then when I go back to it another day, I might feel a little bit more refreshed or inspired, and I can start to make a story out of all of this. So for example, and again, I can send this to you. It's just an example of what I use. But for like the introduction, I start by asking, what is the area of focus? What do we know about this topic? What previous research has been done to answer questions in this topic? What do we still need to figure out? What questions am I asking? How does it fill the knowledge gap? And then what's like the overview of methods I used and the big kind of ahas that I drew from this study. That's just an example. You can do that with methods, results, discussion, and the conclusion as well. So another trick is you can take these questions and try to read another paper in your field for practice and see if you can find the answers to these questions by just reading their paper. And then that will be great for when you go to write your paper, you can see how another person kind of structured their answers to these questions in a format that is what's the word I'm looking for? Like expected in your field. So then you can come back to it later and you can reorganize, add in some more details, make it sound a little more pretty and flowing, connect these questions or the answers to these questions with transitional sentences, things like that. Another example of this question and answer kind of format is these 7 questions. So taking time and really just setting a timer for yourself to answer these questions. So the first question is, what am I trying to say in my paper? So one thing you can do is either write these things down or just talk yourself through this and maybe record it or just talk yourself through it and make notes while you're talking for, the allotted amount of time that they suggest. And then that should be able to kind of spark some inspiration and ideas. So what are you trying to say with this paper? What's the big idea? What is the primary evidence that you use in your paper? Are you reviewing, are you doing a literature review? So we're reviewing published papers, or are you looking at your own data that you collected in the lab, or a study you conducted with a survey, things of that nature. So what's the primary evidence? Why is it significant? And why do you think the readers will find it significant? And then those are just some examples. But again, I'll send you all of these. And it's really nice to just kind of lay out all your ideas and get a clear understanding of the direction of your paper and where it needs to go. Sometimes when you're just writing without direction, it can feel a little more disorganized or disjointed. So really thinking about the kind of outcome you want for these papers in your writing can be really beneficial to you. It might take, a little bit more time at the beginning of the project. You're spending a little bit more time thinking and planning, but as you're doing that, you're going to spend less time with the like revising and going back and forth in your brain of like where you should change things or where things should be moved to make it flow better, that kind of thing. Okay. And then another example is called free writing. And I have a picture of The Catcher in the Rye, this book. That's one of the classics that we read in English class here, at least in the US. If you guys don't know this book, it is really written in this kind of stream of consciousness style. So basically, whatever is coming to the narrator's brain, they're just saying it. And so with free writing, that's kind of exactly what you're doing. You're not worrying about the structure, about the grammar, about citations, about anything, and you just set yourself a timer. I usually do like 25 minutes where I am just word vomiting everything onto a page that I think pertains to my topic. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, I set another timer to go through and pick out all the things that I wrote down that were actually good. This can be nice because you're not really placing a lot of time or judgment on what's coming to your brain, and then later you can go back and you'll realize that maybe you did have a lot of nice things to say, and now you just need to add some citations or some connecting sentences. Or sometimes I've definitely had this happen after doing this. I go back and maybe only one sentence really sounded good, but I can pick that sentence out, and then that gives me a strong base for where I'm going. So either way, it's usually pretty helpful, and it at least gets me in the kind of writing mode, which can be hard to just start typing away. So if you're just typing whatever's coming to your brain, that can kind of like ease you into that headspace where you're typing away and trying to get all of your words out that pertain to your work. And somebody, a quote about free writing is saying that the key to free writing is to write without stopping and without censorship. So this means you write without worrying about grammar, spelling, punctuation, logic, organization, and so on. All that matters is that you allow the ideas to flow. So that can be really helpful. And I think there are people who and personalities that definitely like this better than others, but I think that everybody should try it at least a few times to see how they like it. It can definitely be beneficial for sure. Okay, and then the last strategy before talking about establishing writing habits that I wanted to go over is probably one that you all are familiar with, which is the outline. So there are a couple of different examples of outlines that I'll go through. This first one is the kind of like classic outline where you have your intro, body paragraphs, and conclusion. For each major paragraph, you give the like thesis statement and the topic sentences and some supporting information. And in those supporting information, it can be, your discussion points, it can be papers that you think are important, basically anything you want. And when you write a really good outline, at least for me, writing a good outline is basically my first draft of a paper. It can be really helpful to start bare bones, just have intro, body, conclusion, and then start adding more complexity into it. And then eventually you'll realize that you have basically your paper written. You just need to add some of those nice connectors and transition sentences. So then another common variation of this outline is using like what's based in scientific literature. So you're starting with your introduction, your methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. And so for this one, in the introduction, you want to give the necessary background information, previous literature or research that has been done in this field, identify the gap of knowledge that it still exists, and then show where your research comes into play. How does your research fill that knowledge gap? And then for your methods, you start to think about, how did you answer these questions? Where did you conduct the study? Who did you conduct it with? What was the data collection like? How did you analyze that data using statistics? Um, all those different necessary details. Laying them out like this can be really helpful. I definitely suggest doing this kind of outline when you're even, before the end of these projects, like while you're still conducting your study, because you can really get your intro and methods well formed before you're done. And then that way, once you're done with actually the experiment, you'll just have to focus on your results and discussion and conclusion. And for those sections, the results is where you're just presenting the data and you're not commenting on what it means or interpreting it. The discussion is where you interpret the results, you link it back to the introduction, show how it fills your knowledge gap, and then you can discuss, what does this mean for this like scientific community? What does this mean for society? And where might you go next? Where should future research go next? And then another last example of an outline is using this kind of sequence or order. So this is really helpful when you're thinking about even paragraph to paragraph what you're going to talk about. This could also be helpful when you're thinking, when you're not conducting a scientific study, if you're communicating with the public or, you work in a completely different field. This is a really nice thing to organize your thoughts in a sort of timeline of events. One of our writing tutors is, or previously, she got her master's in journalism, and she really likes this kind of sequencing. She also said that one thing that she does or used to do more often, but would actually cut up pieces of her writing, like of her first draft, and move it around to see where things fit better. And she said that she does this because that was like a thing that you would do to make your like journalistic story more captivating and right to the point. And she said that she really utilizes this kind of outlining. So you're doing a timeline, the steps in a process, and then finding these relationships between cause and effect. This could also be used in scientific writing for like your methods section. I think that would be really helpful. Showing exactly how you did something so that somebody else could reproduce what you did. And then in general, with outlines, like I said earlier, I think it's really good to start simple. So just even starting with the headings of your different sections. That is a great way to start, and just to get words on paper and make it so that blank page is becoming a little less daunting. And then from there, you can start to build in complexity. So for me, what I like to do, I do my headings of different sections, and then my supporting details. And then, as the next step in complexity, I like to write the first and last sentence of each section so that I know that I'm connecting these paragraphs well together. Another thing I like to do is under the supporting information, start listing papers that point to that supporting detail. Um, just to organize my thoughts and make sure that when I go to write that I'm including all of the like, necessary papers or the ones that are really important in the field and I need to make sure that I mention that kind of thing. Um, and like I said, this will eventually just write itself at that point. As you're building complexity, you're doing a lot of writing. And then all that really you need to do at the end of these kind of more complex outlines is start connecting sentences and forming these ideas into sentences. And you'll be well on your way. So, with that, before we go to the next section, I first wanted to ask if anybody has any questions about any of those methods that I mentioned. If you do, you can unmute or ask them in the chat. And if not, I would love to know what methods have worked well for you in the past. So if you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can just type in the chat. Maybe it's, outlining or free writing or something that I don't know about. That would be really cool so I can learn too. But I'm just curious to see what other grad students use in their kind of writing heavy lives.
Hey, Gabrielle, thanks. That's very informative.
Yeah.
I'm having fun with these. I don't think I've ever seen before the message box,
Oh,
and I can
nice.
definitely see that I can use that most definitely.
Awesome. That's
Yeah,
great.
I've used before a one that's called Fishbone mapping, and
Okay.
I'm not sure if you've seen that before, but if you can imagine like horizontal lines, and you're trying to sequence one major topic followed by another one. And then what you really ideally want to do is how do you nest the line that is above the center line and the one that is below? And
Okay.
so by finding those bigger topics, then you can certainly move from left to right or from right to left to the end goal, to the main goal or the end state.
That's
And I've
awesome.
used that, yeah. And most
Okay.
definitely the outline. The
Yeah.
outline is the one that we get taught, that we exploit throughout our careers. And in grad school is absolutely necessary if you're going to be successful writing any sort of paper. But
Definitely.
no, thank you. Very valuable. I appreciate it.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. Thank you, Luis. That's awesome. I had not heard of the fishbone method, and I'm definitely gonna look into that. That sounds really, really helpful. And then Celia being said, classic outline, free writing, and then after that, shifting body paragraphs and evidence within and across the chapters to figure out which logical sequence is better. Nice. I definitely do that too. Nice. Well, thank you both for sharing. I can't wait to look at that fishbone method and add it to this resource. That's really cool. Okay. So then the next kind of part that I wanted to talk about is just how do you establish different writing habits? Because as grad students, we're writing all the time, whether it's for class assignments or your own thesis and dissertation, or, little things here and there, just like emails, all these kinds of things. We're writing all the time. So we have a couple of different methods that you could try. I've tried a variety of these things, and I think um, they've been really helpful to me. So that's why I'm sharing them with you because I hope they could be helpful for you all too. Okay, so the first one, I kind of mentioned this with the free writing, but for this one, I love setting myself timers. I don't know why, but it just like puts this weird like pressure or something on me that makes me focus in. So I will, when I'm ready to write, let's say after, or when I'm doing this kind of planning phase of my writing. I'll turn off, my emails. Sometimes I'll even like go outside where I don't have Wi-Fi or turn my Wi-Fi off. So I'm like, okay, all I can do is use like Word on my computer. So then I'm in that mindset that I'm just going to be writing. Then I set a alarm for 25 minutes, and then this is where I'll either free write or work on a specific section of my paper, or I'll work on my outline and gathering good supporting information that I really need. So after the 25 minutes is up, I see how I'm feeling mentally. And if I'm like in the zone and I feel like I can keep going, I set another alarm for another 25 minutes and I keep going. Um, and then at the end, when you're checking your progress, if you did that 25 minutes and you were like, that was hard, that was not very fun, and I really had to push myself through that, then I take a nice break and I, go work on some other things for a few minutes. And then I check back in and say, okay, let's try another 25 minutes. Um, so that's just something that has worked for me in the past, and especially when I'm trying to keep myself like on a schedule or I have certain deadlines that I need to meet. That's been really helpful. Another thing, first, I guess I'll ask, do any of you have a time of day where you're most productive with writing in particular? Nighttime? Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's in the morning.
The morning?
Yep.
Okay, nice. Me too. I am definitely a morning writer. But I did this thing called a writing log that kind of showed that to me. So if you don't know what time of day is best for you, one thing I suggest is keeping a writing log. So you just use Excel or Google Sheets or whatever kind of spreadsheet you like to use. Ophelia said morning and night. Oh, that's good that you're productive at both of those times. That's really nice. Um, as you can see, this is an example of a writing log that I had for 1 week. So basically every day you keep track of how much time you spend writing and what time of day it was. And so at the end of the week, I saw, okay, well, clearly morning time was kind of my best time to write. The only time in the afternoon I did write was for 10 minutes on a Monday. So that clearly was not my time. So when I find the kind of ideal writing time, then I was able to kind of block off a section of time in my week or a couple of different sections in my week where I make that my dedicated writing time. So, for example, I like to call them writing Fridays. I notice that I write really well and for a pretty sustained amount of time on Friday, especially Friday morning. So I don't go into the office that day. I work at a coffee shop and I just write whatever I need to do for that week. I plan out what I'm going to write during the week, and then on Friday, all I'm doing is writing. So it's really helpful to kind of like pinpoint what day, what time works best for you. But obviously, your schedules change and things come up, so this might not work for everybody. Okay. And then another thing that is important to think about when you're trying to find your writing time, what is it that you need to be productive? So for me, I usually need to have some kind of like table or desk. I'm not very good at just sitting in like a beanbag chair and writing. I like to be at a desk or table. I like to have a little bit of noise, whether it's like chatter in a coffee shop or music. I always like to have a cup of tea with me. Um, and then some people I know really like to have their outline and like highlighters and markers. So really like show what they're working on, what they've done, what they need to do. So just thinking about all the different things that you might need in order to be a productive writer. And then thinking about, okay, what places um, would that work? So some people can work anywhere. Some people have to work at their desk in their office. Some people really like to write at home. Do any of you have any specific places where you really like to write, or do you feel like you can just write anywhere?
For me, it has to be a quiet place,
Okay.
usually in my office.
Okay. Nice. Awesome. Well, if you Okay, let's see. At home, on the desk with white background noise, cup of tea, and nuts. Oh, yes, perfect. Tea and snacks is very important to me too. That's great. See, these are very good things to know about yourself. Because then once you know what time you like to write, that you're really good at writing at, the place, the setting, and then you have your content, you're ready to go. And then you'll be well on your way finishing up your writing projects. So before we end with some resources, are there any other writing habits that you all would like to share? If not, that's totally okay too. But always just curious what other people are doing. All right. Okay, so one last plug for the Writing Center. One thing I would want everybody to know all the time is that you don't have to come to the Writing Center with any words on a page. You can come to the Writing Center with a blank page, and we can start working through one of these strategies together. Um, you can come at any time after that as well. One thing that I've seen people do for their like establishing a writing habit is to set reoccurring weekly appointments with Graduate Writing Center tutors, or the same tutor for the semester. That kind of keeps them on track and makes it kind of like a somewhat of like, when you have a class assignment due every week, you're making sure you're doing your reading and you're making sure you submit everything on time. So some people like to have that extra little like, okay, I have an appointment next week, so I want to get this amount done before that appointment. But the other thing too is I totally have had people in the past where some weeks that's just when they come and think about their writing projects. So they didn't do anything in between appointments with me, but then we talk about, okay, where are we going next? And what do you need to work on and um, what's coming up? So always think about using this free resource, and then I will make sure to send these slides and some PDFs to you all. I also have a couple of links to some other Writing Center resources that are pretty helpful when you're thinking about writing outlines or that message box, things like that. But that is all I have for you all today. Thank you all so much for coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick around and ask. Um, Otherwise, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, let's see. So, what would your writing habits be if you're stuck with what is the best sequence for logic and persuasion? Okay. What is the best sequence for logic and persuasion? Hmm. Well, I would say, hmm.
I tell you that for me, writing argumentative essays is
Mhm.
probably the best thing that you can do for if you're looking for establishing writing that is logical in nature.
Hmm.
Look at argumentative essays formats and then try to stick to that and see if it works for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you, Luis. The other thing you could do is by looking at argumentative pieces or persuasive pieces, you could do that question answer kind of format. Look at how they do it and then maybe like reverse ask questions that they answer in their piece. And then you can go back to your own stuff and then just start answering those questions, if that makes sense. course. Anybody else have anything they would like to ask or talk about? And I'll stop the recording now.